It's the holidays, and Squizzy and Floof are making their way down your chimney to bestow the perfect gift. But until then, here's a video for you. It's a long overdue topic, and with money talk on the rise, let's give the people a budget Levia deck. That's right, because for only $50, you can build an armory threat level Levia deck that will captivate you for hours on end with the flavor, complexity, and potential of the Shadowborn abomination. In the spirit of the holidays, I want to bring back another giveaway for you folks on the channel here for a signed by Wisnutan himself cold foil adult Levia. Now, if you want this card to show up in your Christmas stocking, all you have to do is leave a comment of your first game you ever played with Levia. Tell me how it went. Did you win? Did you lose? Did you have fun? Just leave that comment and I will draw a winner by Christmas Day. Good luck. Salutations, my spoiled skulls. It's ManSant, and we're back with a budget deck tech for you that only cost you $50 to really get you on that on-ramp towards becoming a dedicated Levia head. And let me tell you, it is a great time to dive into this hero because we've already had her dedicated expansion set in Dusk Till Dawn, and then also an entirely new set coming in February, Heavy Hitters, that obviously has brute support inside of it. So, if you want to try this hero out, like I said, it's only going to cost you $50 to really tackle a deck list that brings the flavor, the uniqueness, the strengths, and of course a bit of the weaknesses to bear on your quest to master this hero. If you like beating up illusionists, throwing really big numbers, living a little bit dangerously, and having absolutely game-breaking pop-off turns, then this is the hero for you. So to get things started, we're looking at a red base that is very blood debt heavy, and that's because to actually get any use out of playing into blood debt, you want to make sure that the cards that you're using are the best rate possible. So what that really means is packing a lot of power behind above rate cards in Levia's kit, like Dread Screamer, where you can banish to gain Go Again, and Endless Maw, where you can banish to gain +3, as well as unique cost curves like the 1-cost Boneyard Maw, really allow you to play into blood debt with actual payoff because you're doing these unique things. One of the other really unique axes that Levia can play on is with recursion pieces, and what really makes these cards so powerful is that you can play them from your banish zone, banish them from your graveyard with some of those attacks, and then replay them from your banish zone, basically giving you an extra hand of cards that you can play whenever they incidentally get banished, or especially in this deck because we don't have Scab Skin Leathers yet, we want more access to Go Again, and this is basically saying spend 2 resources for 3 damage, baked in Go Again. It's the same as swinging like a Mandible Claw when you would have an extra action point, but now you're actually doing it off of this recursion piece, which also can fill your graveyard when you play it, which is really, really strong. Next to that, we have 1 Ghostly Visit for smaller combos next to Dread Screamer, where similarly, when you have an attack that had Go Again, you get to launch Ghostly Visit at them, 1 cost for 4, right out of your banish zone. One of the cooler combos with the Ghostly Visit is actually Ram Raider, because Ram Raider is going to banish from hand as opposed to from graveyard like Dread Screamer to gain Go Again. And so what you want to do with this card is either combo it with Slithering Shadowpede, where if you banish this sucker, it's actually still playable because it's from your hand, or if you didn't hit the Slithering Shadowpede, because that is a bit dependent on draw sequence, you can at least throw the Ghostly Visit off of the 1 resource you would have floating when you pitch a blue to Ram Raider for a 3-card 10 little combo. To help get the recursion pieces out of the deck, you have Shadow of Blasmaphet, which is really hard to pull off when you have multiples in the deck, so we've brought it down to just a singular copy, not because this card is expensive, mind you, it's dirt cheap for Majestic actually, but really what you're trying to do is play this early game, pull out a recursion piece that lets you control your graveyard like Howl from Beyond, and kickstart this really, really strong engine. Then we finally have Writhing Beasthulk in the red slot to give us some late game power in just dominate on a stick, close out that game that you fought so hard in so that it just ends before blood debt kills you. Next, in the yellow base, we have the lovely combo, which I'm so glad actually fits in this $50 budget, Blood Rush Bellow next to Beast Within. Now, specifically, Blood Rush Bellow is a card that absolutely launches Levia through the roof in terms of her numbers, because not only is this going to give your Mandible Claws Go Again and +2 for the turn, Levia actually has easier access to throwing 4 attacks in a turn under Blood Rush, rather than Rhinar, who's normally stuck at 3. So when you play Blood Rush, the ceiling of these turns can become Claw, Claw, Dread Screamer, Graveling Growl, or even a forced play with like Hooves the Shadow Beast, which we'll get to in a second. So this card is fantastic, and then Beast Within is such a cute combo next to it because you're turning off Blood Debt when Beast Within actually banishes the card. So for a small hand of Blood Rush plus a blue and Beast Within, you are turning on your claws, giving your turn +2, drawing 3 cards, turning off Blood Debt. It's everything you could ever want. Absolutely fantastic little combo. In the rest of the yellows, we've got some more Blood Debt role players like Graveling Growl, which is a 1-cost 6, albeit conditional. So you can play this next to your Dread Screamer, you can play this next to your Ram Raider, and it's just a really good rate and flexible because yellows do pay in for a lot of the attacks in the deck, and also the Mandible Claws when you draw them on a Blood Rush turn. Hungering Slaughter Beast is another nice role player because as an extra banisher, it helps you keep recurring the Howl from Beyonds that you've got in the deck. Even though it looks vanilla at its core, the 2-cost means with 2 blues, you can play a Howl, Hungering Slaughter Beast, come in for a 3-card 12, probably reset those Howls as well. Mark the Beast is a great insurance piece, not because it plays into recursion at all, but because it guarantees that you turn off Blood Debt, as well as having some discard synergy. And more than anything, it's just a really good card for new players to Levia because you will never miss turning off Blood Debt with this card, which can be a point of frustration when you're still new to the deck. And then finally, one of the reasons that this budget deck actually can do so well from the games that I was playing online is because Shaden Death Hydra is another insane ceiling for the deck, even at its cheap cost. Shaden Death Hydra is a insurance piece for the late game that actually doesn't need you to play into Levia Redeemed or Levia Consumed. It's its own late game. So without having access to the Demi Hero yet because of this budget that we're working with, Shaden Death Hydra still lets you have payoff for playing into so much Blood Debt. So really, really good card and has some strong combos that we'll talk about in the blue base. Finally then for the blue base, we've got some proactive graveyard fill in Barraging Beatdown, which also can just be a blue that you burn on a Blood Rush turn to make sure more of your damage goes through. It's a great, great blue, very flexible. Convulsions of the Bellows of Hell is then an actual closing piece because of the dominate that this can give to any of your attacks, or even the Shaden Death Hydra specifically when your deck is so concentrated with blues and yellows that if you park the Convulsions in Arsenal, you can easily Convulsions into Hydra on a 5-card play, just come in for 14 dominate. There's no way your opponent survives that. Very, very strong. Deadwood Rumbler is just a blue 6 that Levia has access to and is actually quite playable in the early game as well. Dread Screamer in blue plays a very similar role to the red, where you don't hate playing this. It comes in at a breakpoint anyway at 4 attack, and then can do the same things late game, where this can turn on a Hydra turn. It can also still come in next to any of those 1 costs, and then also adds more ceiling for your ability to go 4 wide on Blood Rush. 1 Reckless Swing is a cute way to end the game and is personally one of my favorite cards in the Brute class. This ability to play a very fair game up until the point where your opponent is put into a very unfair situation because they die to the inevitable Reckless Swing is one of my favorite states in Flesh and Blood. As a 1-of, it's impossible for it to really clunk up, and honestly getting some kills under your belt with this card is one of the highest points of Brute, so you gotta play it. Then we have Soul Harvest, which is one of Levia's specializations, and it's actually quite playable in this kind of deck because you can banish your Ghostly Visits and Howl from Beyonds next to some other Blood Debt 6s, so when you look for this +6 buff that you could potentially get, some of the cards you banished are instantly replayable with all this recursion, and it's not just clearing your graveyard of nothing but 6s. So this card, 3-card 12, great rate, resetting your recursion pieces. It can be actually a lot more than just a printed blue 6 power. Speaking of blue 6 power, Wrecker Romp is pretty basic, that's all it's doing for the deck, but you can also play it on like turn 0 for some extra graveyard fill. But then finally, the other piece that unlocks this kind of budget Levia deck to some new heights is Tear Limb from Limb. Because if you remember back on not only Shaden Death Hydra, but even looking at any of the 2 costs, like Writhing Beast Hulk, Tear Limb from Limb has insane playability in Levia. When you have a large hand, because you're so blue heavy, you can just kind of rip these things, tear these things from the top, and play these 5-card hands where now your Mandible Claws are active because you've discarded a 6, and your cost curve works so beautifully that Claw into a 2-cost means you're coming in for like 15 damage next to a Dominate on Writhing. That's just incredible. Next to the ceiling as well of 26 damage next to a Shaden Death Hydra. So in terms of your bingo sheet for this deck, it's a Reckless Swing Kill, a Dominated Hydra for 14, but also a 26 damage Hydra with Tear Limb from Limb. It's absolutely crazy. And now that we've looked at the core of the deck, I know I kept mentioning these Mandible Claws. Mandible Claws are the weapon we're going to use for this deck. It's pretty basic. We're not much of a weapon deck because we have to keep turning off Blood Debt, but we use Mandible Claws when we're given large hands, like the Tear Limb from Limbs or specifically Blood Rush Bellows turns, where all of a sudden the Mandible Claws are going to gain Go again because you've discarded a 6 for a pretty good rate. So Levia is all about really trading back and forth as a mid-range hero because you do have to turn off Blood Debt as soon as you play into it, but then uses her weapons to bring herself into the fray and just go crazy with these Mandible Claws. The equipment suite itself is actually quite good nowadays. You've got a new addition from Dusk Till Dawn in Spoiled Skull, which is an incredibly strong effect where in a pinch you can spend one resource, choose one of 3 attacks that you want to play this turn. And when your deck it has a lot of redundancy in turning off Blood Debt, Spoiled Skull with a blue can target something like Dread Screamer, Mark of the Beast, and Hungering Slaughter Beast, and effectively that 1-card hand is now just throwing 6 damage and turning off Blood Debt regardless of what the Spoiled Skull ends up picking, which is really, really strong. And then it also doubles as an Arcane Barrier piece, so you don't even have to worry about that. Crazy good. Next, you've got Hooves of the Shadow Beast, which is actually debatably better than Scabskin's Leathers anyway for some players, because this is the control over gaining an action point once per game, rather than Scabskin's making you roll dice. So you get a Battle-Worn 1 block piece, which is great, on top of your ability to say, hey, this Blood Rush turn can go 4 wide, I'm going to crack Hooves, and just go for a 26 damage play. Absolutely incredible. Next to the Hooves, we've also got Grasp of Darkness. Because we're not running Scabskins plus Gamblers, our arm slot is opened up, and rather than going for Goliath Gauntlet for a bit more aggression, I prefer the Grasp of Darkness because of its cutesy ability to prevent 2 at will. You don't have to ever declare the block 2 with this card, right? But if your opponent comes in and maybe it's an Azuri that shreds over the top of something, you can Grasp, block that effect anyway, and then move on with your life with no hit effect having to deal with. Finally, Heart and Crossstrap as the chest piece. I was torn between this one and Barkbone Strapping, so you can kind of pick which one you want in that case, but I think Heart and Crossstrap's dependability of just always reducing your attack by 2 is much stronger, because Levia doesn't want to play with a lot of random chance, believe it or not, because when you put yourself in a position to get too unlucky, you can actually just lose the game. So Heart and Crossstrap, unlike Barkbone, there's no luck involved. You're not rolling a die for resources. You can just say, hey, I have a 1-card hand of Mark of the Beast, I can Heart and Crossstrap, and I just know for a fact I'm playing this Mark of the Beast for 6, I'm turning off Blood Debt and just going to move on with my life. In terms of an upgrade path, the first thing to pick up would be the Demi Hero, because this really makes you think quite deeply from turn 0 onwards about the give and take of a Levia gameplay pattern. This fight over not just your opponent's life thresholds, but now your own, because 13 becomes such an important number. Flipping to Consumed changes everything you can do about playing Levia, especially in a late game scenario, because now decking out is an endgame rather than Blood Debt. And Redeem just as a safety net is always great as well. So really picking this up lets you unlock that next layer of complexity that Levia has these days. After that, I'd start to pick up the Carrion Husk specifically, because 6 block on a piece of equipment is just so tough for a lot of decks to fight through. On top of that, it helps you protect your own life threshold that you now worry about because of this Consumed flip. After that, I'd start to look at Doomsday, because Doomsday is not a card you'll necessarily play every game, but it adds another layer of skill to playing Levia, where because this is such a powerful card in a 1-of, you can start to track this kind of threat density feel in your deck, this ghost stack, where your Doomsday is, when you can plan for it. Then we've got Art of Horror, because this card has really become so core to some pop-off turns with Slithering Shadowpeed specifically, as well as when you splash recursion pieces like this list baseline has in Ghostly Visit. Banishing those cards is just straight value, and as you play more Levia, you start to really miss those turns that don't have go again. And so Art of War, just as yellow, being part of a pitch curve you don't mind, and enabling more hands in Levia to just go wide, is a really, really core piece of the game plan you're trying to pull off. The other bigger, more chunky equipment pieces like Scowling Fleshbag, and then pivoting towards Scabskin Leathers with Gamblers are a last piece you can add to the deck. Not critical, mind you, because Spoiled Skull, Hooves, and Grasp are still so strong you can get away without this for a long while. But once you add the ceilings of what a Fleshbag can do to stop your opponent, once you add the ceilings of what a Scabskin's 6 roll can do for you, you really won't want to go back. Lastly, when you are building around cost, Swing Big is the least effective in terms of money spent to performance gained. There are a lot of good things this card can pull off for your deck. It's an early game play, it's a fantastic next to Tear Limb from Limb, but at the end of the day, you don't really need it, and it's so expensive that you can really leave this as the last piece to worry about. And then finally, in We Make Best style, we're going to speed through a gameplay that I recorded off Talishar versus Arachne with the deck, and this deck does not have a sideboard, mind you, because really, when you're working at the budget level, it's not something you should prioritize if it costs any extra money. Just get the core ready, right? And then also build specifically towards your local metagame or whoever else is on this journey with you, newly into Flesh and Blood. But here we go, Levia versus Arachne. They went first and attacked with their full hand, and one of the things in Levia is blocking early. It lets you fill your graveyard, and then that graveyard is going to go towards all these costs of your Blood Debt attacks. So whenever your opponent gives you free opportunity to block in the early game, you should likely do it so that you don't run into issues later. The first turn was also pretty incredible because we found with that extra filter of being able to block 4 cards, right, we then drew up into that Shadow of Blasphephet, which even though our turn going second was pretty weak, we only threw 6 damage on that entire hand, we were able to set up a Howl from Beyond, which unlocks a play like this, right? This is now our next turn, and off of that 1 blue that we had, we're throwing 9 damage. The Howl from Beyond into the Slithering Shadowpeed. We're not even playing into Blood Debt with that kind of line, so if our opponent forces us out, because Arachne tends to be pretty laden with hit effects, we can respect it without having to eat a bunch of Blood Debt. So our opponent keeps attacking us here, and we're noticing that this is actually a pretty aggressive Arachne build. The Give and Takes and the Ravenous Rabbles, as well as this Red Pummel Pitch, mean that we probably can just trade quite a bit, because a lot of their hand is going to only block 2 per card, right? So we go for a pretty inefficient line here, mostly because the opponent presented kind of an awkward deck build, and we get to throw a Blue Dread Screamer into a Writhing, really just trying to banish a lot on that turn to reset the Howl from Beyond. Because remember, this build isn't really built around specifically recurring the recursion pieces. They are a bit incidental, so when you can find room to banish 6 cards in a turn, then hitting the Howl becomes that much more likely, and it unlocks amazing plays like this one, where once we have this room for a Blood Rush turn, we can dump 21 damage on our opponent. That was 4 cards, by the way. We did not play out our arsenal. Our arsenal is still sitting pretty for next turn. It's just a guaranteed way to turn off Blood Debt in Hungering Slaughterbeast as of now. Sure enough, when we throw 21 damage, we buy ourselves some room to play through some of the brickiness that Levia can find herself in. We drew an all-red hand, but it doesn't matter because we just presented 21, so our opponent on the back foot of that actually gives us room to play through some of our own inconsistencies. And that's the kind of momentum that Levia really wants to play the game on. When you are overwhelming, then your opponent is forced on the back foot, and then you're not under so much pressure yourself, because remember, you are your own lose condition a lot of the time. Now in this play, we did get a bit interrupted, but it's okay. We are so ahead that landing this true damage effectively from the Writhing Beast Hulk is probably either going to push our opponent into a second dominate to close the game, or even just guaranteeing that this Blood Rush closes the game, because granted they were probably low enough for that anyway, but now at 1 life, the claws coming in for 5 is just such a beautiful break point. A single defense reaction doesn't block that out. They're going to have to give 2 cards every time, and it will likely just be game. And our opponent didn't do anything too crazy this game. They did hit us with the Leave No Witnesses. They're coming back at us again with this Codex Leave No Witnesses. We're seeing a bit of what our Grasp of Darkness can do here. Our opponent committed to Mask of Perdition. Doesn't matter, because we're going to commit Grasp once we see that they're going a bit all in on resources to pull off our own turn without facing disruption. So that's pretty much it. The flex on the end there to come in for another 21 damage Blood Rush to end the game. And there we go, folks. That is $50 for quite a whammy of a Levia deck. Hope you all enjoyed. Don't forget about the giveaway, and I'll see you in the next one.